Okay, good morning or good early afternoon, depending on where you're at in this lovely country of ours. Just wanted to say welcome to our roundtable with Minister Hussen about Budget 2021. We have until about 10 minutes past the hour with Minister Hussen, so we'll want to get into this fairly quickly. I'd like to introduce our co-host today. First, we have Nicole Waldron, who is past board president of CHF Canada. We have Jeff Morrison, who's the executive director of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. And we have Al Weeb, who is the co-chair of the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network. And I'm Tim Richter, president of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. With that, I will pass it over to Nicole to walk us through some of the housekeeping for today.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm pleased to be here with all of you today, and I'm representing the Co-operative Housing Federation of Canada. Today's webinar will continue with remarks by the Honourable Ahmed Hussen, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Following, we will open it up to a question and answer period for the Minister with Tim, and he will moderate this section. I would also like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted throughout the webinar. Participants can ask questions in the language of their choice through the Q&A text function. It's at the bottom of your screen, normally to the right of your screen. Please feel free to use the chat function to share comments and to speak to other participants. And to access the French simultaneous interpretation, click on the translation button at the bottom of your screen. Please note the webinar will be recorded. I will now pass the proceedings over to Jeff Morrison, Executive Director of Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. Jeff?
Merci Nicole et un grand bonjour à tout le monde et bienvenue à cette session aujourd'hui. Merci Monsieur le Ministre pour être ici. Nous savons que votre temps était très occupé cette semaine. Comme Nicole a dit, les points importants sont sur votre écran. Si tu en as des questions pour les ministres, on va avoir la chance de poser les questions dans la boîte de chat qui était au bas de votre écran. S'il vous plaît, posez des questions en anglais ou français, c'est à vous. Il y a aussi de la traduction simultanée. Donc, si vous voulez étendre les commentaires en anglais ou français, vous avez le choix. Et donc, avec ça, encore une fois, merci. Et Tim, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. And just before we get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement today. I want to like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we're meeting virtually, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we are each enjoying from today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Al to introduce the Minister. Al?
Good morning. Thanks, Tim. It's my great pleasure to welcome the Honourable Ahmed Hussen, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, to this post-budget forum on the most important and critical issues facing Canada today, and that's homelessness and housing. We, the Allied Networks of the CEH, thank the Honourable Minister for taking the time out of his busy schedule to be with us here today. As co-chair of one of those networks, the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network, and on behalf of people with lived experience right across the country, we want to thank you. And we want to let you know that we are appreciative of the fact that of your willingness to engage people with lived experience in conversation and in the effort to end homelessness in the country. Recent directives have shown clearly that the voice of lived experience is wanting to be heard by the federal government. And we thank you for that. And we also are very willing to work and engage with the government both now and in the future. There are two items in the budget in the homeless sector that I'd just like to basically highlight, and one of those is the renewal or the continuation of the Reaching Home funding. It will allow projects of capital projects and programming to continue forward without interruption, which is vital in the move to reduce homelessness in the country. And we do know that working on CAB in Winnipeg, I know that it is so vital to keep these programs going, to both get housing and maintain housing for those experiencing homelessness and those who have recently escaped homelessness to housing. Secondly, I really want to thank the government for turning a focus on veterans homelessness. Really happy to hear about the 2-year pilot project. It's a sector that has been neglected somewhat in the past, and there are pockets in the country, in Ontario in particular, that are really working diligently to end homelessness. But this will allow different areas of the country to really help out the veterans and their plight of homelessness. Plus, will shed a light on the plight of veterans in the country. And I just want to make one other point, and that is perhaps we need to be really, really mindful of the difference between affordable housing and the term housing geared to income. There's very many differences there, and I think if we can pay more attention to that, we will make a big difference. But again, Minister, Honourable Minister Hussen, we want to welcome you again to this really important post-budget forum. Thank you so much.
Minister, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. If no one is on mute before they speak, it's not a real virtual meeting. So this is great. It happened to me finally. Merci beaucoup. Je suis heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui avec vous. It is a pleasure to join all of you. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am joining you virtually from Toronto on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. I want to begin by thanking all of you for giving me this opportunity. I'm not going to speak too long because I look forward to your questions and comments and feedback because I value the opportunity to hear directly from you. And a lot of what I have been able to do with respect to our government's response to the homeless serving sector, as well as housing, the affordable housing sector, a lot of that has come from meetings like this. So I intend to continue to benefit from your insight, your feedback, your advocacy, your expertise, and quite frankly, for some, your lived experience. So, but I want to just do a few highlights, vignettes from the budget yesterday, and I want to begin with Reaching Home. $567 million over 2 years, beginning this year. Beginning in 2022-2023. So again, budget 2021 proposes $567 million over 2 years, beginning in 2022-2023, to go to Reaching Home. This would maintain the 2021-2022 funding levels that we announced in the fall economic statement. You recall we had put in together an investment of $299 million for this fiscal year as a response to the pressures of COVID-19 pandemic on the homeless serving sector. But prior to that, in 2020, we had also invested additional resources through Reaching Home to make sure that we were responding effectively. In addition to that, I just want to highlight Budget 2021 proposal to provide $45 million over 2 years, beginning in 2022, to pilot a program aimed at reducing veteran homelessness through the provision of rental supplements and wraparound services for homeless veterans, such as counseling, addiction treatment, and helping to help veterans find a job. And the rest is really for other housing investments. There's money in for northern housing to build affordable housing. There's additional money for the National Housing Co-investment Fund, which you know is about building deeply affordable permanent housing units across the country. So we intend to invest an additional $750 million in the National Housing Co-investment Fund this year and next year to accelerate the creation of 3,400 new affordable housing units and repair 13,700 existing units. And also an additional $250 million under the National Housing Co-investment Fund to support the construction, repair, and operating costs of an estimated 560 units of transitional housing and shelter spaces for women and children fleeing domestic violence, as well as $300 million in funding this year and next year for the conversion, to support the conversion of vacant commercial property and turn it into either affordable rental housing and affordable housing in general. So this is great news, and of course, more support for the Federal Community Housing Initiative, $118 million over 7 years, starting this year, to support community housing providers that provide long-term housing to some of the most vulnerable citizens in Canada, and $315 million through the Canada Housing Benefit. So this is additional rental, direct financial assistance to low-income women and children fleeing domestic violence to cover their rent payments, and $600 million to expand the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. This is a fund that has been used by cities like Toronto to build more modular housing units and deploy them as permanent housing solutions for homeless individuals. And I saved the best for last, $1.5 billion in new money for the Rapid Housing Initiative. You know that this program has worked really, really well. It's the first time we tried it last year. And the target was to create 3,000 affordable housing units. We are now on track to create 4,777 new permanent affordable housing units built rapidly. A lot of them will come online this summer or fall. And it will, of course, house, among others, people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. So $1.5 billion additional, which allows us to go down the list and fund projects that we were not able to fund last time because we ran out of money. And these are really good projects that are ready to go. And again, I think we will exceed the target. So those are the main points I wanted to cover. Happy to answer any questions and get as much feedback from this meeting as possible. Merci.
Tim, you're on mute.
See? Oh, you've got, damn. Anyway, sorry. Thank you, Minister, for those comments. We have lots of questions here lined up for you. Just a reminder to everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A tab. We have about 20 minutes, so we'll get through as many questions as we can in the time that we have. First, though, I'd like to start with Jeff Morrison, who has a question for the Minister.
Thanks, Tim. Minister, as you know, the biggest gap from the 2017 National Housing Strategy was the absence of any program or any strategy for urban and rural and northern Indigenous peoples. As you know, Indigenous peoples living in urban and rural settings suffer really from the worst forms of housing inequality in Canada. It was in your mandate letter from the Prime Minister in 2019 to develop an urban and rural Indigenous plan. We've had a parliamentary committee study it. We've had your parliamentary secretary who had publicly committed to it. Unfortunately, in yesterday's budget, there was no announcement of an urban and rural Indigenous strategy. My question is, why was an urban and rural Indigenous strategy not included in yesterday's budget? And to be blunt, and I speak with I think some frustration from our Indigenous members, although I'm not Indigenous myself, they've communicated that frustration as to what will it take to get us there to a point where we can have a for Indigenous, by Indigenous, urban Indigenous housing strategy.
Fair enough. I think that's a very important question, and I want to highlight a couple of things. Number one, the Rapid Housing Initiative, as we have unfolded it, I'm talking about the Rapid Housing Initiative that we introduced in October of last year, the $1 billion Rapid Housing Initiative. Out of the 4,777 affordable housing units that will be achieved through that program, 40%, almost 40%, of the housing that will be created permanently through that program is going to Indigenous communities. So that is one thing that I wanted to point out. I expect the same thing to happen with the new $1.5 billion investment in the Rapid Housing Initiative. Couple of things I'll say about your question. Number one, there is, as you said, a parliamentary committee studying this issue. They're on the verge of providing to the government very valuable recommendations on the path forward. Even though the name Urban, Rural, and Northern Housing Strategy does not appear in the budget, I want to assure you that there are many elements in the existing but also new money in housing, for example, in the RHI and the Innovation Fund and so on, that we will be able to pull together to respond to what I expect to be really good recommendations coming out of the parliamentary committee that will help us as a government to have an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. Obviously, what the report will give us is recommendations on the path forward together with Indigenous peoples. But I assure you that at least some of the money to get started is there. It's embedded in the Rapid Housing Initiative. It is embedded in the new money for the co-investment fund. It is embedded in some of the money for acquiring commercial properties and turning them into affordable housing. It is certainly embedded in some of the new money that is going to Indigenous services. $18 billion for infrastructure. I think some of that money can be repurposed for Indigenous peoples off reserve. So there's a number of pieces that are there, and I think there needs to be a roadmap from that we will utilize from the committee to then get the work going, at least on an initial phase, but of course in conjunction with the community. And that's what Adam Vaughan Adam Vaughan and I have been talking about. It is something that we intend to do together. So the fact that the name doesn't appear in the budget does not in any way suggest that this is something that we're not going to move ahead with.
Thank you, Minister. I can see from the chat and from the questions that this urban Indigenous housing strategy is something that's on the minds of an awful lot of people.
Yes.
And I think I would join Jeff in saying that it is a significant gap that we'll have to get on top of. A question now from Tina Stevens, who's with the Native Inter-Tribal Housing Co-operative in London, and she's the president of CHF Canada. Tina's asking or saying very little co-op housing has been developed through the existing co-investment fund. So I'm looking to understand how the budget commitments will better enable more co-op housing to be built.
The money that has been allocated to the Federal Community Housing Initiative, this is $118 million over 7 years. So again, making permanent the monies that we've been providing to the co-op sector on an ad hoc basis, the co-ops and the nonprofits, and closing the gaps, but also moving forward to support those community housing providers to deliver long-term housing to the most vulnerable. So $118 million over 7 years, I don't know what that works out to. I'm not good at math. I have to pull up my calculator for that. 118 divided by 7. So that's 16 million a year to, again, not a lot, but it is some money to support the construction and repair of more federal community housing and provide and support those community housing providers to implement, to continue their subsidies and so on. That is there in the budget, but we'll continue to fight for more. And I have demonstrated together, working with Adam Bond, that we always try to find more money for community housing.
Great. Thank you, Minister. A question from Anila in Calgary. She says, good morning and Ramadan Mubarak, and I apologize for not wishing you a happy Ramadan sooner. With your background at the IRCC and with our clients being newcomers at CFN, as you know, we're seeing a heightened need for first language supports in all social services because COVID has heightened the systemic barriers. Is there any appetite for assisting us in capacity building in the sector to build better partnerships with organizations serving racialized communities in first language, and also in the hiring of professionals who speak first language?
I think there's always room for that. In the Emergency Community Support Fund, for example, the $350 million fund that was set up during the early days of the pandemic to support nonprofits and charities that are supporting the most vulnerable. We demanded from the intermediaries a proactive plan to show us how they will get to making sure that everyone is included in terms of both the receiving organizations, but also the populations that would receive the services. And in both, I can assure you that based on the stats and the reporting that we received from them, that they were able to live up to our expectations. In terms of language, that is a little bit more tricky. I mean, I don't know how we would be able to provide that. Maybe provide that through some of the operating dollars that we provide organizations to deliver services. It's something that's always a challenge. I know that, for example, engaging non-English, non-French speaking Canadians is a challenge. I mean, there are many groups out there that do really good work to enable people who have either literacy issues or who struggle with English in English Canada, or who struggle with French in Quebec and in French communities outside of Quebec. There are organizations that we partner with, not as much as I would like, of course, but to the extent that we can. Those organizations do help people navigate certain benefits systems and housing systems to help themselves, and we do provide funding to some of those organizations. I would like to do more of that, but there's always limitations to things that we can do based on the financial limitations.
Thank you. The next question is from Michael Braithwaite, and he's asking, is the rapid housing money announced to be used for projects already submitted in the first round, or to put another way, can the projects submitted in the first round be funded out of this second round, and when do you think the details will be announced?
So first of all, before I answer that, I just want to make sure that I clarify the 2021 National Housing Co-Investment Fund money, the $750 that I mentioned, as well as the $300 million for the commercial acquisition. So the acquisition of commercial property and turning it into affordable housing. That $300 million is reprofiled money taken from the rental construction financing initiative. So I just wanted to do that, and it's just getting these things done faster and speeding up the urgent needs. So reallocating the $750 for urgent needs, and then setting up this $300 million carve out to grab commercial properties and turn them into affordable housing. For the Rapid Housing Initiative, first of all, the budget has to pass, the Budget Implementation Act has to pass, and then it has to go through the Treasury Board process. So I don't think we will be able to get any money out before June at the earliest. But there were so many good projects last time that we simply couldn't go ahead with because we ran out of money. And so this will allow us to then apply this $1.5 billion to the remaining projects and just go full speed and give folks an opportunity to reevaluate. I know that there are people, for example, who are hanging on to some properties in the hope of getting selected for the first round, who may not be able to keep those properties in reserve. And so those folks may drop off the list. And then we just look at the next project and so on. But no final decisions have been made. I would welcome your ideas about that, actually, if you think we should just go with the existing list, or if we should open up and so on, knowing that that may delay things further, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I welcome views. No decisions have been made, but we will we'll definitely apply all that $1.5 billion into projects.
Right. Well, I can say, Minister, that we will happily accept that invitation. I think there's lots of things that I think we can do to make the rapid housing initiative even more effective. Question from Michael Schaff.
Actually, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So last time we split it down the middle. It was $1 billion. We split 500 million for cities, 15 top municipalities that had the highest number of homeless individuals, and then the other 500. The other 500 was for projects for the rest of the country. Are you guys in favor? Is this roundtable in favor of doing the same split again, or do we just take the whole 1.5 billion and apply it to projects?
Well, good question. I'll ask my colleagues what they think. I think one of the challenges we have is making sure that the money will also get to smaller communities. For our part, one of the things we're quite eager to see is that because it's 100% capital,
yes,
very low rent, which makes it perfect for people experiencing homelessness or those in extreme core housing need. I think making sure that those projects get funded will help you accelerate your impact on your chronic homelessness goal. In terms of the split, I think we would be supportive of continuing some form of split, but we have to acknowledge, have to have a look at where some of the gaps might have been, which communities did not receive that money, which where there's capacity in the nonprofit sector for delivering doing this housing quickly. It's more challenging for nonprofit sector providers than it is for municipalities often. And how do we make sure we get the right housing to rural and remote communities as well?
Yes, and the other challenge is people say, well, we didn't get our per capita share, but this was based on need, not per capita population. It was per capita of the homeless individuals and the need in communities. So if certain provinces didn't get a lot of money, it doesn't mean that we weren't allocating this on a per capita basis. We were allocating this on the basis of need. And if the need is greatest in, for example, Toronto, then a lot of money went to Toronto because that's where 60% of homeless individuals in Canada.
And that's one of the challenges that rural communities are putting up is that they often say that we haven't been able to measure homelessness in the same way that Toronto has, or it hasn't been studied in the same way as it has in the centers. So the need is there, but it's because it's unquantified, it remains and isn't eligible. So part of it is figuring out how we balance those things. I think Jeff, you wanted to jump in.
Well, yeah, and one thing I wanted to really say that is good news for this sector as well is we can also look at leveraging the new Affordable Housing Innovation Fund to support the co-op and nonprofit sector. This fund has done so much in the past, and we've been able to do that, and we hope that we can continue to do that work. So there is an opportunity there for the co-op and nonprofit sector to leverage the new money in the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund.
And Minister, in February, we had sent a letter based on feedback from our members on ways to improve the co-investment fund, and we'll resend that, especially with yesterday's announcement. To your question, we had recommended moving to a solely an application-based format. We argue that it creates a level playing field, and as Tim mentioned, it ensures that even smaller municipalities and rural municipalities who may not be part of that the larger municipality stream would have equitable access through a subjective, through an objective application process. So we would argue for moving to that model.
Okay. Thank you.
3 times, and I left myself on mute. All right. Really quickly, there's a question on rural and remote northern homelessness from Michael Shapcott. He's saying the rural, remote, and northern regions of Canada face significant housing needs, and in most cases, the cost for land and buildings are as high in urban areas. So how does, Michael's asking, how does the budget and the National Housing Strategy ensure that a fair share of funding and programs goes to rural and remote communities?
Well, first of all, there was an expectation that, for example, in the Rapid Housing Initiative, we made sure that every territory received, some funding in the project stream, and that is where we balanced both need as well as per capita in some cases to see if a particular territory was missed or something in the strict scoring process. We would revisit that and rejig things to make sure that everyone was reflected. There's still the carve-outs and the northern non-cost matched dollars that we provide to Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon. Just in the last few weeks, I announced a $60 million spend in Northwest Territories. It was the largest single announcement in housing by the federal government in Northwest Territories. We funded the almost, not all, but almost the entire allocation of the RHI applications for Northwest Territories through that carve-out, $60 million to support 23 projects. And someone says that's old money, but guess what? That money was just sitting there and it hadn't been used for housing because we needed the Northwest Territories government to also agree to it. And we just applied that money to the RHI. But we also approved an additional project for the Tlicho government in Northwest Territories through RHI. And we intend to continue to deliver on a number of projects through the co-investment fund. There was the Avens project in Yellowknife, delivering housing for seniors. There's the Borealis project that's coming up. There's a number of projects, 25 million announcement recently in Yukon. And now this budget has 25 million both for Nunavut and Northwest Territories. I know the need is greater. We also prioritize projects through the co-investment fund for the North. And also through our Rapid Housing Initiative. And now with 1.5 billion, we'll be able to do even more.
So I'm going to ask Jeff to have a look on our Q&A for a question en français, but while he's doing that, I know we have well over 100 questions in the Q&A, and we've got about 4 minutes. I'm not sure how many of those 100 we'll get to, but we'll do our best. I'll ask Jeff to look for one, but as we're waiting, a question from Marianne Bedard in Toronto. And she asked a question that I know is on the minds of a lot of folks in the homeless system, is that the new round of capital for the Rapid Housing Initiative is very welcome. The issue that we have, and I think others around the country, especially those working on chronic homelessness, is the lack of operating money or money for those as well for those supports. And she's asking, will the Government of Canada contribute to the operating costs associated with the RHI?
No, because that is something that is usually provided by provinces or municipalities as part of the application process. The applicants have to demonstrate that as we deliver 100% federal funding for the capital and the land, they can then get support from the provinces. And by moving on this very quickly, I'm happy to say that virtually all provinces and territories came through with the supportive services. So I'm not quite concerned about the supportive services. Whenever we moved on the capital, the provinces have to step up, and they get pressure from the proponents, of course. And we intend to do that. Obviously, Reaching Home plays a role there too to provide the services, but for strict wraparound supportive services to the projects, it's all provincial, and we expect for this 1.5 new money, $1.5 billion for RHI, for provinces to step up once again.
Great. Okay.
In cases where, like, for example, there's a question around Newfoundland and Labrador, they said the government is facing severe fiscal pressures. In cases where we see that the province is clearly unable to provide those supportive services, then we can look at other options and other ways to support.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
Je peux poser une question en français de mon ami Jacques. Il dit la première phase de l'initiative rapide a donné lieu à une entente spécifique entre le gouvernement du Québec et le gouvernement fédéral. Mais la grande majorité des projets soutenus dans le cadre de cette entente étaient déjà planifiés et financés par le gouvernement du Québec. Pouvez-vous nous donner une assurance que s'il y a une entente de cette sorte de genre pour la prochaine phase, que le gouvernement fédéral posera comme condition que les sommes allouées par l'initiative rapide serviront à financer de nouveaux logements et non pas projets déjà en voie de réalisation? So in other words, the Quebec Accord was paying for projects that had already been planned and financed by the government of Canada. There was no new net new net housing units. Would a new accord between the federal and provincial governments in Quebec allow or ensure that projects were new and actually adding to the capacity for new affordable housing?
The simple answer is yes. That would be my priority, to make sure that the housing money through the Rapid Housing Initiative and the investments in Rapid Housing Initiative related projects in Quebec go towards new projects that provide rapid housing, permanent affordable housing solutions to vulnerable individuals in Quebec. And that would be my my position, and I will fight for that position. Yes.
Now, Minister, we have 108 questions waiting for you. I hope you have time for one more.
Sure.
If you don't mind. So this is from Khulud, who's with the Women's Housing and Homelessness Network. Khulud's asking, as demand for shelter beds increases, women and gender diverse peoples face some of the greatest disadvantage. Across Canada, there are fewer women-specific emergency shelter beds. 68% of shelter beds are co-ed or dedicated to men, compared to 13% dedicated to women. Research consistently demonstrates that women will avoid co-ed shelters for fear of violence because they've experienced violence in those spaces. The research with the network says that reaching home definitions of homelessness do not adequately capture women's and LGBTQ plus experiences. Funding silos between women fleeing violence and women experiencing homelessness creates large gaps, further invisible, making women invisible, as women experiencing hidden or chronic homelessness are unable to access VAW or homeless services. Any thoughts on how the budget investments are going to help close these gaps?
I think we have to start from the fall economic statement. There was a significant amount of money to build shelters, transitional and supportive housing. I believe it was over $700 million to build more on reserve, and also in the territories to build 12 new shelters on reserve, but also in the territories. In addition to that, you know, the National Housing Strategy has a carve-out specifically for women and girls building transitional and housing spaces. So there is a carve-out of $250 million in the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, because our government recognizes the importance of dedicating money specifically for building transitional and housing, transitional housing and supportive housing spaces for women who need it. In addition to that, there is, under the Rapid Housing Initiative, there is an expectation that a significant amount of those units will go to women, vulnerable women, as it has. The results from the first Rapid Housing Initiative demonstrate that almost 25% of the units have gone exclusively to women. And of course, there's also some overlap in the other categories, for example, with vulnerable seniors. So that is something that we're very much keen to move ahead on. and the new $1.5 billion rapid housing initiative will help in that regard. So, and just to put it into perspective, between the fall economic statement, the new rapid housing initiative from October, and now the current investments, I think that if you look at the total, it is over $13 billion in new housing dollars, and this is not even including the additional monies in Reaching Home. So just from yesterday, there's an additional $2.5 billion overall in different housing related pockets of new money in the budget.
Great. Thank you very much, Minister. I know you have to go. I would happily keep you here all day because we've got lots of questions. People are very eager to hear from you and give you their feedback and ask you questions. So I do appreciate the time that you've taken. I don't know if you wanted to say any last.
Yeah, I'll say that I know that there's more questions and more people who would have liked to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, I just have to go to another engagement. But I want to assure you that I want to continue to hear from you. We've come a long way, but we're not there yet in terms of eliminating chronic homelessness and making the necessary investments. But at the same time, we've come a long way. Let me put it into perspective. When I became the minister responsible for housing and homelessness, the rapid housing initiative didn't exist. That's an idea that came from tables like this, and I fought for it, and I got an additional $1 billion. And now it's become, and it was supposed to be a one-time program in October, and I fought for it to be brought back. And we were able, luckily, to get more money, $1.5 billion. There's, of course, the existing National Housing Strategy dollars, the regular streams that exist, and we're continuing the investments in Reaching Home. But there's also a commitment that I really want all of you to be aware of, that our government made in the speech from the throne last year to eliminate chronic homelessness. That commitment comes with a lot of additional pieces that we need to deliver on, and I'm very much aware. It's about not just new money, but also finding more ways to collaborate to unlock dollars to use for housing now. And the experience that I had, for example, with the Northwest Territories was very, very helpful and fruitful, because it was very collaborative of us to come together and unlock dollars to deliver housing solutions now for residents of Northwest Territories. So we'll continue to do that and make sure that that we're ambitious in this space.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for taking the time. I know there are hundreds of people on the line, and they're all very eager to hear from you and ask you more questions. We've got a bunch of questions on the Q&A and some on the chat, and I'm going to see if there's a way for us to download those and perhaps share them with your office, and perhaps there'll be a way for us to post some answers along with recordings of this webinar. We'll be posting recordings on each of our websites at some point shortly. And we will let you all know via email when the recording and the Q&A is posted. Thank you again to Minister Hussen. Thank you to Jeff, Nicole, and Al for joining us and for co-hosting this event. And thank you all for all of the folks working in the housing sector, co-ops, social housing, affordable housing. Thank you all for the work that you're doing, those leading homeless systems. Thank you all and doing the work in frontline organizations. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. And to our friends with lived experience or who may still be experiencing homelessness and are on the line, thank you for joining us. We'll make sure that your voices are heard by the Minister and his colleagues, and help you with Al and the Lived Experience Network to make sure you're in those circles. And for those of you who are, I know, dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety and working hard against long odds in this third wave, thank you for your work. Please be safe, and please know that all of the hosts of this call are working tirelessly day and night to try and get the funding and policy and housing that you need to end your homelessness and or to help others in your community. So thank you all very much. Best wishes, have a great day, and we will talk to you all again soon, I hope. Thank you.
Merci encore. Merci, Tim.
Thank you.
Merci, Nicole.
Thank you.
Yeah.